a certain bit, and just moves. All right. So there's normal movement. See how I'm moving the hip?
Yes.
All right. So if I couldn't move that, then it would be stuck out of a neutral position. So this is the most obvious example.
Okay.
If I pushed it down and it didn't spring back, then it would have been stuck down and forward. So
Okay.
that would be an ASLM or a PILM is up and back. So when I looked at them earlier, that's the first one I checked right there. And that's and the reason why I'm showing you that is that's normal movement.
Uh-huh.
And this one right here is more, it's
resistant,
stuck.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's stuck. And also, the part of being stuck is it takes he's standing a little different, but it takes the end of the sacrum, which is right underneath this muscular right here, and drags it one direction. So, as far as adjusting it, try to get up that on the hip, try to free it up right there. There we go. Now I got it with that motion right there, and now the whole thing bounces. So there's adjustment in the hip, and that's the first thing while he was moving around. And earlier, before he sedated, that was painful for him. So he was resisting that. He was resisting that pressure. It was stuck up and back. I was trying to move it. He was feeling some sort of spasm associated with it. So, oddly enough, about this joint, when it's out of place like this, drags the tailbone over. Sometimes I can't adjust it until I push the tailbone back over, which is exactly what just happened right there. I ain't going too far off my body.
Borrow. It's yours. It's yours.
So a horse has 18 ribs. I believe like a dog has 13, and we might have 12. I can't remember. But a horse has a bunch of extra ribs. And why would they have a bunch of extra ribs? What do the ribs do anatomically? They protect
the inside,
the lungs. And so horses have a giant lung field, and they have an expanded rib cage to cover that lung because they're athletes. They have huge hearts, giant muscles in their hearts, and they're athletes, and they need to move oxygen in and out of their body, so they're developed for that. But it leaves a very short area. It leaves a very short area where you have the lumbar spine, where most of the flexion happens, or the horse's ability to flex the spine and the hind end. This is generally all there, because in front of there it's stabilized by the ribs. All right, and so you lose a lot of flexion. You look at a cow, and the cow has these big lumbar fossa because they actually have 13 ribs, and it creates a big space with no ribs holding the flank out, and that's how come you have those concave areas in a cow. All right, so check right there. There it is, right there again. I've got motion. I've got motion restored right back right there. There's a little divot right here where it's the lumbar sacral space, and you can feel it. And so you have a spinous process for each rib head just underneath this dorsal spinous ligament right here, and there should be a little bit of bounce in each one. So I'm on one right there, I'm on one right there. So the spinous process in the back, they have the ability to flex, and they have an ability to rotate a little bit. So I'm, with that portion of my palm, I'm putting it right on the rib head, and I'm testing it for motion straight now. So just like I tested in the process down there, there's 5 joint spaces here on an Arabian. There's 6 joint spaces on a quarter horse thoroughbred. But just like I tested that for range of motion and that for range of motion, I just tested this for range of motion. And likewise, I usually actually, the vertebrae in front, they get stabilized much more side to side, but they can still go out back. As you get farther and farther forward, the spinous process is angled back more. So in order to get in line with the angulation where the vertebrae glide, you have to push more and more and angle forward. So you move and you can feel it going forward. And it's hard to move over in the withers, but it's good motion right there. All right. So he's got very uniform spring from the front to the back, really. All right. So once again, from here forward, they all have the ability to articulate a little bit in the frontal plane, which is rotation. So I'll put my palm on it and see if I can bend each one over a little bit. And everyone's bending nicely.
He's very relaxed with it.
Everyone's bending nicely. And he had one bit that didn't bend right there. I just moved.
Just bent it back. Yeah, popped it back.
I just popped it back right there. All right. So generally, this is typical of a young horse for most part, in good shape chiropractic. The older you get, the more you, the
Aches and pains.
less firm from a muscular standpoint. You get really muscles and ligaments stabilize joints. So good firm muscle with a lot of tension. They tend to stabilize joints in a neutral position. So one thing about there's a T relation on the vertebrae where you have processes off the side that stabilize it on the horizontal plane, and you have the dorsal spinous process that stabilizes on the vertical plane, and you have this big area of lumbar muscles that pass right through here. And so you have an L portion. Right underneath it, right at this place, the ribs come out. They sweep back right here, and right here they swing back to the front, and right there's the top of the rib cage where you first feel the ribs, because in that, once again, in that kind of L shape right there, it's full of muscle. Trying to remember the name of the muscles. But anyways, I check my adjustments, because if you have, particularly from a horizontal standpoint, if you have a vertebral segment out of place, the rib heads connect right between vertebral segments, and it lifts the rib heads and it puts the muscles in spasm right over the rib. So you can put your hand on top of the rib cage and you can push down, and everything should be right there. Everything should be filled really even all the way to the back, which it does. And it's a way, for me, it's a way of just confirming that the spinal column is an adjustment.
So if that one spot that it was out was, if you didn't put it back in, it would have resisted.
It would have been lifting. It would have been lifting the rib head, and I would have felt it. Yes.
Yes.
And actually, it would have been lifting. It's going to be interesting to feel right there, because it was out this way, and so it would lift the rib head right here. But interestingly, that's ends up being called a rib out of place, and it's a real source of discomfort for horses under saddle, particularly in this area. It's really common for a rib to be out of place. You know. So that's really good. As he gets relaxed, his hips moving better and better. So I get back on the other side. Same thing there. I already checked the vertical adjustment. So there's the horizontal.
And that's where
All right, so he was out of place. He was out of place right there, which is interesting, because he was out of place one direction all the way, and he was out of place the other direction right below it.
Yeah.
And that actually seems to be common. And if you think of it, they're usually not right next to each other. One place, one direction.
Someplace else.
It has to go back in place by being out of adjustment someplace else. So that was good. And you just film the top of the rib heads again, and they really feel pretty good. All right. So the head and neck of the horse. That was a pretty good adjustment right there in the middle. That could be related to saddle. That could manifest as discomfort in the saddle. So I'm interested in that makes a difference.
You will find out. We will tell you.
We'll try him out tomorrow.
And if not, you might try your friend's saddle, see if it makes a difference. Okay. So we have 7 cervical vertebrae in about the space that long. A horse has 7 cervical vertebrae that extend all the way from here all the way to there. All right. So they're big vertebrae. Each kind of area is a little bit different. So what you just end up going through about 18 rib spaces that are all fairly the same. They just change a little bit of angle as you get to the front. All right. So the horse's ability to flex the neck, for the most part ends up being between C1, which is the atlas, and C2, which is the axis. This ridge right here is the axis. This wing right here is the edge of the atlas. C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6. And if you slide like that, you can feel the ridges that are the articular facets on the edge of the joints. But each one's are responsible for a different range of motion. So because this axis-atlas relationship has the ability to flex a lot, and sometimes it goes up and back, so you check for normal range of motion like that. Oh, and that is very normal.
Yeah, he's
sometimes
very
it's stuck right there. All right, so between the atlas axis, excuse me, that's axis C3. Atlas axis has a relationship with protuberance called the dens that goes from the axis into the atlas. Atlas has the ability to turn like this. It's the articulation where the horse can swing its nose side to side and have rotation. So you check to see if it can be stuck in either direction by whether one wing of the atlas gets stuck up in either direction. And the way you kind of check that is I put my palm right on top of the wing of the atlas, and I check it to pull. It moves really freely.
Yes.
And I check it, get on the wing of the atlas right there again, and check it to pull and move really freely. All right.
He's coming with you.
No problem.
Sorry.
So, absolutely normal through there. The skull into the first cervical vertebrae, there's a big opening, a broad oval opening like this, where you have two occipital condyles on the back of the skull that fit into an opening on the
That's my husband.
atlas. No problem. Those condyles restrict motion to a little bit lateral like this. It's the horse's ability to move its forehead side to side like this while keeping its forehead or poll vertical like that. Horses that are out right here, they'll often, if you go to pull a rein or take their head, they move by going like this with their nose first instead of turning their head. And that's actually really common. But you can feel it by moving the horse's head like that. And that's a normal motion right there. And that's normal motion like that. All right. So it's perfect from here forward. Well, sum total of these other articulations are the horse's ability to bend its neck. And so each place bend its neck. And when they place, they bend on a gliding plane. That's right. They bend on a gliding plane at about 45 degree angle. And that actually ends up being 45 off the center, 45 down, or 45 forward. So the first one is once again C2, C3, and I can feel the ridge right there. It's also a place where the horse is folded around my hand right there. And so I push down right there. The vertebrae folds away. It's normal. Drop down to the other side of C3, which is right there. Boom, folds away. It's normal. Drop down to the other side of C4, which is right there. And as you get lower and lower, they're less at that angle and they're more across, just like as you go from here, it's less down and more forward. But there's C4. C4 is big, and it's the thick portion of the horse's neck right here, and you can always kind of feel it in your hand because it's a huge bone. So there's the front of C4, C3, C4, C4, C5, normal. Once you get to C5 and you start climbing to C6, some of it is behind the shoulder, so it's scapula, and so it ends up being more across. So you can feel C5, C6, and that's normal. It moves away from me. It's more horizontal. I usually have to get the horse to take a step to get right there, and there I could, just for that moment, I could feel that C6, C7 was normal. If it hadn't been to adjust, I would have had somebody pick up that leg. So the entire neck is in adjustment on that side. So far we've gone through its entire neck and haven't found one place to adjust. So it's the same thing on the right side. C2, C3 folds away. C3, C4. So he's out right here. His neck is staying really flat, and this is C3, C4. That's the spot where he's out right there, and that's actually very common because it seems like you have that in the diagonal a lot, where if they're out up and back in the hip, they're out with their nose going back in the same direction that they're out behind. So on the opposite neck. All right.
Opposite side, yeah.
Yeah, so that ends up being a balance. I think a balance issue. It doesn't have the same range of motion right here. That side of the hip gets left behind him. He cocks his head out here to stay neutral, and that puts him out right here because he doesn't flex that side. His head stays flexed to the left. So it's interesting horses do that chiropractically, but horses do that from a lameness standpoint too. And they have a real lameness on a hind leg. So a lot of times because it's difficult for people to recognize it. Turning, he never turns his head right there.
You're right.
He stays really flat right there. And that's the adjustment right there. And that's the rest of the adjustment right there. So there was, it was in the front and back of the fourth vertebrae and maybe a little bit of the third. Right. There.
Now it's
There. And there. There you go. So the muscles aren't trained. I can move his neck now, but the muscles aren't trained to keep it in place.
So that makes
There
them
we go.
pop out, you're saying?
Yeah. Sometimes you end up having to come back and adjust
Yeah.
it.
Uh-huh.
But just freeing it up and freeing that side, you know,
It's amazing.
yeah, the next couple of days he might develop the muscle tension to keep it in place, particularly because he's younger. So, let me feel behind his shoulder. I actually feel like I felt it move just now, and it moves fine. All right. So that was that. He was out in the hip. He was out right here in his neck,
And
and he was out right there in his withers. Definitely.
yay. I believe in this. I'm sold on it.
That's fine.